Welcome to this second panel. This is a panel on the success stories of human and AI collaboration. I'm here with a distinguished set of panelists who will be introducing themselves. And I think this will be a very nice sort of expansion of the themes that were talked about in the earlier keynote and the fireside chat with practical implementations in industry. So I would like my panelists to introduce themselves, Rose, Chris, and Ben, in this order.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for having us today. So I currently lead investments and partnerships at a publicly traded company, Wesco. So Wesco is a global supply chain and distribution company in the industrial space, and we are globally in 50 countries. We are in 3 different verticals: the commercial constructions with electrical contractors, that's our first pillar. And then the second pillar, we work with a lot of hyperscalers, data centers, buildings. And then the third pillar, most of the utilities actually use us as their preferred supply chain provider as well. And so I came from a background of industrial, digital, previously with GE Digital, and also financial services as well.
Thank you. Chris?
Thank you, Rose. I'm Chris Ullrich. I'm here representing Systems Technology. I'm currently the fractional CTO over at Systems Technology. We're working right now with AIR directly on a project related to pilot training and assessment using RL techniques for electric vertical takeoff aircraft. In a variety of other places. Systems Technology, actually, interestingly, has been around for about 65 years. Was founded after World War II by some Rockwell guys. Very aerospace-centric company, focuses on human-machine interface for flight controls, and then consulting for FAA, DoD on flight control certification processes and so forth.
Hi, my name is Benjamin Levy. I'm a co-founder and general partner at Bootstrap Labs. We're an early-stage venture capital firm that's been investing in AI for almost a decade now. We tend to lead and price early-stage rounds. We invest in several verticals that we feel AI has been creating or will create a lot of value. Those are future of work, mobility, health, digital infrastructure, financial infrastructure, and then climate and energy. We have made over 70 investments, 30-plus portfolio companies, several exits. Pretty excited to be here and be at our friends Jazz Venture Partner we've been tracking for years, so it's cool to be here.
Well, since you have the mic, so to speak, Ben, can you give us a kind of a general overview of how corporations have been implementing AI projects? Since you have such a history of working with corporations on AI deployments and AI adoption, over the past few months, we've all been consumed by Gen AI headlines, but there's actually a much longer history of AI adoption in corporations. Can you give us sort of your panorama of what that looks like?
I don't have incredible experience. I think as venture capitalists, we always want our technology startups to sell to the big guys so they can start addressing, getting more revenue, more proof points. So from the last 8 years, what we have seen is really we're still in the very early innings. And I think what happened last year with Gen AI has been just we talk about a Sputnik moment. Everybody in the world all of a sudden realized that this thing was happening, this thing was real, or at least appeared to be real. And a lot of people starting to focus more on it. But the truth is we're still at the very early innings of this technology revolution. So I think if you ask a lot of the companies out there, 5% is in production. A lot of people are playing and testing a lot of things, but the truth is very few, little of that technology finds its way into the corporations and the production environment. Rose will sure speak about the supply chain and talk about the tough environment to deploy things and change things. You can't break it, right? It keeps running all the time, 24/7. So excited about what we've seen lately, and I think you may be talking about something that happened recently, but Bootstrap Lab has been acquired by a very large alternative asset managers. Now it's over $400 billion in AUM. But besides doing venture capital investment, we're also now tasked to accelerate the adoption of AI technology across that asset manager. And so very much like anybody inside a corporation, understanding where value gets created, what can be trusted, and use the venture engine to accelerate the adoption of these technologies is a fascinating agenda that we have ahead of us. And I can see that, frankly, the level of knowledge across the corporations varies significantly. But the good news is that there's so many opportunities. I mean, we walked in there and we realized, like anyone that I think understands technology, the opportunity you have inside the organization to drive transformation. And so that's the exciting part. And I think we heard a lot earlier about the trust element, which in my view is one of the big issues we're going to face with GenAI as well, and the perception of what this thing can do or cannot do.
Yeah, indeed. Now, you, as I said, you indirectly through your portfolio companies, but also when talking to LPs, corporate LPs, you've had a sense of how corporations are looking at AI. I mean, there's been interest or intrigue, maybe in some cases, but when you talk to different corporations, again, maybe LPs, where do they start? You know, there's the excitement about what these technologies enable, but practically, where do corporations typically start? Is there a pattern, or is there an entry point?
Let me start by saying that they are considering of being LPs. They're already pretty mature. They already thought about innovation. They thought about either bringing in-house or starting investing in others to learn from the different patterns, and honestly, learning from the GPs that are being actively investing in the space. And so, what venture capital firms are in some ways, they're incredible sensors to innovation. Mm-hmm. And so, the value is in the people that are driving these firms because they have pattern recognitions into what's really happening and they've seen the movie before. And so I think these corporations that are thinking about venture investing, beyond innovation, and build, partner, buy is really a core strategy that any corporation should have. And I think the ones that are thinking about being LPs are a little bit ahead of others in that sense, because they say, look, I can try to spend 10 years to set up my own venture firm, or I can start learning from others a lot faster. And you don't need to put that much capital, by the way, behind these things to learn a lot very fast. So I think that's a pattern we see, is that people that are able to say, look, there's already innovation out there, I want to be aware of it, I want to adopt it faster than the rest of my competitors. Right there, it's a low-hanging fruit, but you need to know and have the skills to vet it. And because I was trained in finance, I guess I look at any operation as an income statement. It's very easy. You have all your lines, and I can tell you there's not a single line item on this income statement that can be disrupted or enabled or empowered with AI technology. The way you sell, the way you market, the way you recruit, you manufacture, you ship things, it doesn't matter. Anything in here could be, empowered and done better, faster, cheaper with AI technology. Assuming it's the right things, don't break what you do. But the most challenging thing for corporations is to rethink their entire value proposition. What is your core business? What's the core service you're selling today? And how can you rethink that with an AI-enabled approach to it? And I use a simple example sometimes. Look, if you're manufacturing lamp for 100 years, your supply chain is mechanical and wires and light bulbs, and your partners look like this, and you're selling your lamp, and it's a one-time model. Tomorrow, if it's a smart lamp, what does that mean? Your supply chain is completely changed. The skill you need to have inside the company needs to change. You're going to maybe sell, you won't even sell the lamp. You might just install it for free and do a business model on rev share of energy. And so it's a major transformation. And so can you attract the talent even in-house to rethink this whole thing and change this entire thing? And that's the hard part. That's where startups have an opportunity, of course, to break through. But I think that's what a lot of corporations are still struggling with, right? This ability to attract talent, retain talent, change things. One of the most successful corporations that came to Silicon Valley, in my mind, we see this tour, right, of CTOs, CEOs coming all the time. And this group, they didn't bring the CTO, they didn't bring the investment officer, they didn't bring, the innovation guys. They came with the HR team. I'm like, well, that's interesting. You guys are coming to Silicon Valley with your HR team? Yeah, and then they're actually HR from around the world. And they started with an open statement. They say, we have a leadership issue. We have an aging issue. We have amazing talent. We've been out there. We're the leader in what we do for the last 75 years. But if we're not getting that transition right, we're doomed. And so for them, they came in with the idea to say, how do I attract and retain the next generation talent? And literally, it's a blood transfusion. And I said, well, it's the last time you made an acquisition. Because you can hire one at a time, or you can buy a company that has 100 people. That would be a graft into your bloodstream of maybe the people that have the right talent and expertise. So build, partner, buy, again, is a way that you have to look at today as a corporation to innovate.
Excellent. Rose, so you are a corporation. And you're very active in terms of looking at AI projects, implementations. You've experienced the successes and hurdles. How does what Ben said resonate with you? And can you give some practical examples of how that works out at Wesco?
Yeah, so Ben really resonate with me. Like we serve as a sensor, right, for the corporations, and a lot of time we look at it from an investment angle, but then there's also a bigger piece of it is what is the learning for us as an organization? Is it because to fill in a gap, a capacity that we currently don't have? Or is it a new business model that it should be evolving from some of the engagements that we're working with these companies that are in emergent areas? And so those are the areas that we actually try to focus on when we're working with our stakeholders. I know the last panels speak about technologies. Yes, I totally agree with you. Involve your stakeholders early in the journey. I think that was the conclusion from the last panel. What we saw, it's successful implementations in terms of not just AI, but any technology adoption within the company. With a large organization like us, we have 20,000 employees. So a lot of times, when startup approach us, they're like, oh, we wanted to serve all of your employees, but it doesn't really work that way. So we really needed to start small with a division where actually will be a little bit more advanced in terms of the maturity, like what Ben just alluded to, is they understand how startup works, and they know that it is a collaborations efforts, not just like turn on the switch and we're not buying gadgets right here, not widgets. And so there's a learning process, and I was really intrigued by the last panel talking about trust, how to build trust. And the way to build trust is not just for the model to get trained, but actually for the human to get trained as well, to get used to that. And then what we see some successful implementations in AI models are the ones that actually have that step, like easy for users to use and then provide human-in-the-loop feedback, and back to the theme, and be able to learn from it so that it's not a threat, spitting out all these different algorithms and then results. It's almost like decision-making without control. But it's like a collaborative effort, and then we see a very successful adoption within the corporation.
When we prepared this panel, you said that Wesco actually had a reinforcement learning from human feedback project. What can you disclose about that?
I think I disclosed.
Putting on the spot right away.
I know.
I can't talk about this.
I think I disclosed most of it. So when we think about AI, is really help us to simplify the decision-making process, because when you actually can access a large amount of data, like for us, we're a 100-year-old company, right? We have a lot of data. And how do you make sense of that data? How can you enhance our decision-making, or even just help operators to be better agents, right, when we're facing our customers? Those are very good use cases where we see successful examples. Safety. We have a lot of workers in our warehouses. We have 800 locations in 50 countries. Safety for our employees back in the old days is like, if you find someone who is doing the wrong thing, you pick on them. But now with AI, right, you'll be able to use AI and computer vision in combinations to provide some prescriptive actions to the supervisors so that they can actually train their workers. But in the meantime, supervisors also need to be trained with understanding how to interface with these actions as well. So we see a little bit more of an adoption in terms of companies that are more successful. I mean, startups and technology companies that are successful are the ones that actually have that thought process of, hey, we're not just providing a technology, but there are services that wrapped around it. I think the last panel talked about products, right? Product, services, solutions, how to actually bring in that results, KPI, to show to your stakeholders that if you're actually honed into one business unit or one champion within the organizations, how can you do the proof point as quickly as possible? So I think those are some of the pointers about the project.
Very good. Thank you. I hope you realize we got a scoop earlier today when Benjamin talked about the evolution of Bootstrap Labs. So you gave us another scoop. Thank you. On the topic of how you think about AI projects, so I want to go back to the question of you start your job on day one and you have an AI title. What do you do? How do you start? How do you decide on the projects that you should be working on, and what are some of the criteria or factors that come into play for these decisions? I think a lot of corporations are struggling with this topic, right? I mean, last year I was at an event where a corporation said, "Well, let's do anything. Anything is better than nothing." And I suppose that's true, but can you add a little bit more thought process to this answer? You.
Oh, me? Okay. I thought you were looking at Chris. Okay.
I have a comment after. Yeah.
I see. Sorry. Okay. So with an AI title, so you're talking about someone with an AI title coming into the corporate? Okay. I actually don't have an AI title, just to let you know. I have an innovation investments title, yes. I think what we found successful within the corporations driving change is to really you have to be tuned in to the ecosystem. And typically with an organization like us with 20,000 people, right, you are going to be able to encounter some people that are just intrinsically motivated to want to drive change and wanted to adopt something new. You almost there are going to be some people in the middle line on the defense, right? And there are going to be some people that are never going to want any changes. So it's really identify that talents. I think the last panel also talked about it. Retaining, attracting talents. And you also talk about it. Is it going to be buying a company to bring in the new blood, right? So it's to find those who actually intrinsically motivated and empower them with technologies or tools that can really help them to drive a business case, especially with enterprise. Sometimes I do think like Ben as well, with that financial income statement. Is it going to be driving revenues here, or are we actually reducing costs? Are we improving working capital, or are we actually driving change, just learnings? So those are some of the things that we need to find the right champion within the company to actually work together as a village to drive some changes with an area where some domain expertise is expected as well. So I hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
If I may chime in, I don't know if
go
I'm
ahead.
conscious of time, but I think it's really important to start focusing on, the ROI is just not one dimension, especially for corporations. You need to think about strategic ROI, financial ROI, and capability ROI, right? So are you advancing in the directions you want, towards applying or using this technology or trying these pilots? Does it make financial sense, but does it make strategic sense? Or is it something more geared toward, we want to do this because we want to develop the internal capabilities to continue doing these things and acquire the knowledge around that? So it's always multidimensional, not just pure financial, but it's part of it. And I think the question you need to ask yourself, if you're on the inside, is how do I drive impact and fast? And so where's the 80-20? Where are the most friction? Where are the problems that have been throwing humans at? Maybe that's a good one to start looking at, right? We're growing so fast, we're throwing humans at the problems, and you need to think about that aspect. And then if you only adopt the innovation that exists in the wild, your competitive advantage will only be differentiated by the fact that someone is taking a bit more time to adopt it. So you won't be really long-term, differentiated. You might be short-term and might be good enough to win market share or compete, but it might not be long-term sustainable. And often the solution providers out there, they solve one part of the problem. And I think that's the thing as venture capitalists, we're trying to think, or founders say, guys, don't come and tell me you've got the best machine vision for X. I'm like, who cares? Are you solving a real problem? Can I take that machine vision and put it into a workflow, put it into a context where it's going to drive value and outcome to people? And I think that's the other thing. I think if you're going to have a corporate strategy to adopt this technology, you can't just think I'm going to buy things off the shelves. You need to think about how do I develop to stitch these solutions together and orchestrate, honestly, a myriad of AI solutions that already exist, but orchestrate them in a way that makes sense for your workflow and the outcome you're trying to achieve. I think if you don't do that, you just, it's not going to be sustainable.
Yeah, I think if I can jump in there too, I'd double down on that as well. I would say, specifically at STI, but also some other companies I work with, I'm a technologist, so I have to get that question which AI technology should we use? And I'm like, that's the wrong question. The question is, what value are you trying to create? And what is the argument you can make around that value generation? And if you have a clearer vision of what that might be, can AI technologies help you get there faster, better, quicker? And if so, do you want to hire, or do you want to partner, or do you want to buy, right? And for me, it's almost...
And what kind of AI technology?
Yes,
Because,
exactly, right? And so you have to be a little bit more nuanced and thoughtful about it. But for me, typically, it's not hire, because that's often the most expensive way to go about it. It's typically find a partner who already knows what they're doing, work with them, leverage it, get to a place where you have demonstrated that that value exists in the 80-20 sense, and then you can double down and invest and make something really happen.
So in the earlier segments, we talked about reinforcement learning from human feedback, and there was a lot of emphasis on teaching the model with human feedback. And Rose, you just mentioned that actually could also work the other way around, where you teach the humans based on what the machines are learning. Chris, we're technology partners, AI Redefined and STI, Systems Technology Inc. Can you shed some light on how you apply this other side of the road, if you will, this bidirectional aspect to your products and the marketplace?
Yeah, sure. So it might help to understand the problem domain a little bit. So we're trying to solve the problem of training pilots for electric vertical takeoff aircraft. And so there's a few problems in this domain. So one is that there's actually no actual regulations that are sort of finalized on how to do that. So the FAA has no final rule. Europe is very close to getting a final rule, but there's no actual well-defined set of regs that you have to meet as a pilot. And secondly, the aircraft themselves are changing, right? So Archer, Joby, all these companies making these aircraft, they keep changing the aircraft. They have different interfaces. Nobody knows exactly what the best one is or how to set it up correctly. And so there's an element of a bunch of stuff that's moving at the same time. And the question is, how are you going to efficiently create a system where we're trying to solve the problem, which is how do we enable as many pilots as possible to be trained as quickly as possible? Because
by the way, if I may just clarify, these electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft are also known as eVTOL or flying taxis, right? And so this is a market that's expected to blossom to the tune of maybe tens of thousands of pilots needed in the next few years. And that's the initial equation that creates the bottleneck.
Yes, correct. I mean, think about it, if any of you have spent any time in LA, getting anywhere is hugely painful. And so if I want to go from Santa Monica to Irvine, like that's like hours at the wrong time of day, but I could get an eVTOL, urban air mobility sort of taxi service, Uber kind of thing, take me there in 10 minutes, regardless of what time of day it is. That's kind of the vision. One of the implications of that is that if that really scales the way it's expected to, you're looking at 50 to 60,000 pilots, which would be like your Uber driver sort of level
and
of pilot.
Air traffic control nightmares.
Yes, air traffic control nightmare, tons and tons of pilots. Right now, there's probably less, I'll count on maybe two hands, the number of people who can fly these aircraft really well in the world today, right? And so the question is, how do I get that knowledge from those people to 50,000 people in the next
Is that a trust issue?
5 or 6? Yes. No. Well, so and it gets worse. It's a regulated market, right? So you not anybody can do it. You have to actually
I'm
get
sure
certified.
the government is really excited about what you're doing.
Yes, and so the question is, okay, we have these guys who are test pilots, which are like the best of the best. How do we essentially generate an AI agent that clones the test pilots sufficiently well that we can use those clones to then train up-and-coming pilots in a scalable fashion? That's really the key question, essentially, right? And so then there's a couple dimensions to that we use from Air's technology. One is the ability to evaluate. So normally when you're learning how to do this, the pilot instructor is sitting beside you and he's like, don't do that, do that. Why are you coming in so fast? Like, slow down, like that kind of thing. There's sort of that level of micro training. And then there's like okay, you mastered this skill, now the next skill is this. Right? So there's sort of two levels of AI that we actually are looking at bringing to play on this. One is a kind of a director, which is curating the training process. The second one is sort of the micromanager who's there sitting with you, telling you exactly what to do and how to do it. And there's different dimensions of skills that we want to clone from these test pilots in each of those different domains. And that's really the problem that we're trying to address with the partnership with Air.
Thank you. Would you like to show something to illustrate?
We actually have a video. So there's a short video here. I'll talk through it a little bit. It's kind of this is like a proof of concept that we're building. If you can pause it real quick here, just orient everyone. So on the left-hand side is sort of the curriculum. It's kind of hard to read, but it's like, here's the different skills that I have to learn, and here's where I am so far. And you can see a bunch of stuff that's shaded out. So that's stuff that hasn't been learned yet by the pilot. And then in the middle here is some feedback that I have from my recent runs, and then my sort of capsule summary thing on the right there of how I'm doing. So if you play it forward, then what's going to happen is this kind of curation AI is going to decide that the next thing I need to do is a certain sort of skill, and then it will queue up this thing called the director AI will queue up a task for me to then do. In this specific situation, we have this set up in our sim lab down in LA, and it's got this wraparound screen with a pilot console in the middle, and basically the pilot's going to try to fly through that circle and then land on a specific location on the runway. It's a very basic skill that every eVTOL pilot would need to be able to do. And during this process, this sort of second AI is watching what the pilot trainee is doing and constantly making notes and suggestions about what they're doing right or wrong, whether their controls are within the right range, whether they're in the right glide slope, and then sort of giving them this kind of evaluation as you go. And sort of one of the interesting things about, if you can pause it real quick, one of the things about eVTOL is both Joby and Archer, who are the leading companies, are really pushing for what's called single pilot training. So most of the time, pilots are trained in pairs, so there's someone sitting beside the pilot. But in a lot of eVTOL aircraft, there's only one spot to sit in. And so you would need something like this to be able to facilitate that kind of training. So if you play it forward, so if we just, once he lands here, then he's going to get an after-action review, which is sort of the evaluation of sort of how he did on this task, giving specific highlights of specific areas where he may or may not have done well, and then some visualization of the actual run and how he did on it, and where are the areas where he was going too fast and areas of concern. Then the director agent will look at that and say, okay, you should focus on the second segment of this task until you get good at it, given the following sort of criteria, and then keep having them do that until they get green across the board in this kind of system, right? And so this is all driven by these sort of clones of these test pilots and the curriculum that we think is going to be the one that is used by the FAA to certify pilots. And so the use of AI here allows us to be adaptable to those changes, right? So in Europe, it's a slightly different standard, so can we create a slightly different agent that does the same sort of thing, but with different standards.
So thank you very much. In this example, you show that the value of simulation, which is not something we've talked about yet much about in this program. Can any of you talk to the topic of simulations and in combination with AI to achieve and orchestrate better outcomes with the combination of humans and agents?
I mean, I think there are a lot of examples. I think, autonomous driving is the first one that came to mind because that's one of the early things that people kept on talking about. And I think we've seen how the simulation is just so vital, right? I mean, especially even the example earlier, as I said, you could have crashed and killed thousands of drivers to even achieve a fraction of the performance where they get. So you want to do that in a simulated environment, obviously, for context and critical decisions. We have a company literally right across the street called Hayden.ai that is having cameras onboarded every bus systems out there in New York, and they're able to capture infraction in real time. But what's interesting about that is they're also able to map the city and have a very intelligent awareness of what's happening in context into the streets. The amount of traffic, the amount of people that are double park, or the people that are walking in intersections, the time it takes to go from point A to point B. And I think that's an interesting environment in which you can have the simulated environment, but really building a digital twin out of this technology and the sensors. And then how do you improve the real world by affecting the real world by changing some policies using these digital twins? Mm-hmm. So I think that back and forth is extremely important. I think we see that in autonomous driving and any other environments where you can simulate a lot and learn a lot, and then lowering the cost of learning, right? So as I was listening to the panel earlier, I want to say, friction is good. Welcome friction, because friction is feedback, mm-hmm. right? And so we're always trying to go to the path of least resistance for many different reasons. But ultimately, friction is feedback. You have kids, and I have kids. I'm like, how do you make them tougher, stronger, more resilient? Well, it's not by making it nicer and easier for them. Not always, right? And that's a tough conversation. So I think friction is important, and that's a feedback mechanism. You're learning something every time there's friction.
You mean like no princess, no princess?
I don't know. That's a whole different conversation. Talk to Disney about that one. I think they've been dealing with it. So I think you have. We're going to see an explosion of digital twins, and that's just the reality because it's extremely efficient to learn in that environment. Yet it's not accurate enough that it doesn't always translate to the real world, and that's been the challenge of simulating things in the virtual world and bringing it to the real world. It doesn't work. And so how do you lower that learning and that friction between these two? And so we made an investment recently in a company that has a completely novel hardware that walks around with these cameras and scan in 3D at the centimeter level accuracy the physical world. And that's exciting because to us it's accelerating the creation of real accurate rendering of the built world that's already incredibly so much out there, and being able to leverage that efficiently to start learning from that.
Yeah, I was going to say that digital twins and simulations also have an application in terms of augmenting the system. So we talked about generative AI and the LLM approach, which is very much based on prediction of the next word in the text, and that's proven its value as well as its shortcomings. RAG, is a technology that's been used to basically augment that with database inputs which are more trustworthy. But the next level and the next iteration of that, which we started to work on, is the idea of effectively tying that with digital twins, so that when you ask a question, the output is not something that comes from a database, but the output, or from some hallucination, possibly, but the output comes from simulations that are run and directed by these AI agents. And so now you've assembled a toolkit of technologies that get you closer to decision-making outputs.
I was thinking earlier, I was like, it's great you can do that in the video game and driving and everything else, but I'm like, there's no trial if you're going to send thousands of emails to your clients. It's like you can, you have to send it to get the feedback. We haven't come to the point where we can simulate your agent, your human on the other side, and what action they're going to take, right? Yeah, we might get there, but
this is a reminder that there's no AI without data. So
well, but what's interesting at the same time is that we heard earlier is that it's not, I think what people don't understand is like you need to have the world's best, very best at every single aspect of this car simulation we read about. Like the guys can understand not only driving, but the mechanics, the velocities, understand the physics around the cars and the aerodynamics. World-class experts need to come together to create this sort of things. And I think that's where people are going to need to be extremely good at understanding these things. But then at the same time, you don't always need to understand everything. And the dimensions around the philosophy and what's the right thing to do, what are the right behaviors on the track, these come from different fields. So this reward function of sorts, or what are our code of values? So how do we inject value systems, or even learning from what they said earlier, I like that. They said, look, if you can build trust with an agent, how do you know they have your best interests at heart? Do they understand what you're trying to achieve, and they're going to try to protect your interest? Right? We haven't really kind of come these things and talked about updating the system. I'd be scared if I'm a pilot and there was an update last night, like in my Chrome browser. Like, what the heck am I going to find when I start taking off with this airplane if something happened overnight, right? And I don't even know what it was.
Yeah, I think there's another dimension here, which is related to that, of trust, which is regulation, right? So the two main companies that I work with, one's FAA regulated and the other one is FDA regulated, right? And in both situations, AI is a bit of a scary topic, right? Like if I go to the FDA and I say, I'm using AI in my surgical robot, and don't worry, it's gonna do cholecystectomy automatically. Like I'm not gonna get that approved anytime soon. I can guarantee you that, right? So the question is, what is the right level of evidence or face validity for these simulation-trained AIs for them to have a role in the regulatory process, right? I think that's an open question. I'm just sort of throwing it out there. I don't have an answer.
We're holding people, and I think we're holding machine to a higher level than humans. Yes. That's the thing. It's like if a human kills another human in a car accident, that's one thing. If a machine kills another human, we have a problem with that, right? So I think at some point, we're going to need to understand the risk and reward and the loss, and the critical situation that will happen. Again, it's back to friction. It is friction. There's always something that gets sometimes broken, and you learn by mistakes. Now, the more we can put into a virtual world, the better. But ultimately, it's going to impact the physical world. And this is why this revolution is so big, because it is touching everything.
But I think your point about simulation having ultimate fidelity or the highest possible fidelity is really the thing that gets the trust to be tangible, right? Which is, okay, I believe that some of the best vehicle physicists or mechanical engineers made that simulation, then I'm going to trust that it can actually train me to do a real skill, as opposed to like a Mario Kart.
But I mean, and that was spoken about, like, Lee Sedol, when looking at AlphaGo, he walked away saying, look, I saw a way to play this game I've never thought about before. And that made him better, and he actually won one of the games, I think, coming back from that understanding. That driver earlier, she said the same thing. She says, I've seen the car and moves that are not really human, but it feels like I should try some of those moves. And I think we saw that at some point. The guys, they were starting from behind, they passed in front. That's because they literally drove over the turn, cutting through, right? What most drivers would consider, that's kind of a mistake. And frankly, I'm not even sure that's real, because maybe you will get a flat tire if you do that in the real world, right? But I think that stimulation of stimulating human imaginations by learning from the machines is interesting. It's kind of pushing us. And we're the company, to your point earlier, which is not about just us teaching the machine, which is going to be, we're still at the fraction at the beginning of this, which there's so much more we can do. And often I'm like, do you have children and you're designing this AI system? You don't have children? Maybe you should learn from little humans and how we train to teach them for hundreds of years, because there's a lot to be said about it. At the same time, if you go back to this, I'm like, how do we take this and as I said, inject some of these values, right? Because at the end of the day, I think that we need to trust the systems, and humans have a certain way to establish trust. And you can't create any value if there's no trust. That's just the bottom line. In Silicon Valley, I think, is this pay-forward mindset that has been helping this ecosystem so much. But trust but verify, right?
Yes. Well, thank you for the very engaging panel. I want to leave time for the audience to ask questions. So there's a mic in the room if you'd like to ask.
Yeah, we talk all day. Stop us.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Dave Anderson from Beat Ventures. Thanks for the engaging panel. One of the things you said about companies, a lot of companies are saying that they want to adopt AI, but very few have. So only on the range of like 5%. What do you think is the most important thing that could occur over the next year or so that could increase that from 5% to getting out of that POC phase into the next phases?
I mean, having competitors successfully implementing it and you have not, and they're just crushing in the marketplace. I think that's how corporations are driven, right? They're all accountable to better performance, to their shareholders, to the stakeholders in general. So I think that's going to be, and there were some studies on that, right? It's like if you're an early adopter, you're going to literally be even ahead of the fast followers. And because again, you can scale this learning so much faster once it's established and trusted. And so I think that's what's going to happen. It's going to take a couple of traditional companies that are coming from behind, and all of a sudden, might be crushing. It's like the old guard a little bit, coming and say, oh my God, these guys are crushing it. And I think competitive pressure is a healthy one to drive more adoption. But frankly, I'm also concerned of the other side, which is a setback, a failure, because they will happen. People will use this technology the wrong way, in the wrong context. And we've seen that every time it happens, there's a big backlash, and because a lot of people just don't really understand. When you say that you have a chatbot that's racist, I'm sorry, the chatbot learned from the data of society. Society is racist. You have a problem with that, address society's problem, right? And so don't go blame the bot.
I think that's a really good point, though, which is an existing industry, and I think your lamp example was a good one. So if there's a company making lamps, like I'm just thinking Systems Technology is literally 65 years old, and I go walk in there and I'm like, you guys need an AI slap in the face, right? But at the same time, their thought process and their sort of conservatism around making sure that the value they're creating is going to have longevity to it. And the thoroughness around that is something you don't typically get in a startup where you're just racing to get there as fast as possible, right? And you might be very technology driven. Whereas at STI, we're like, okay, what is the mechanism by which we're going to use AI to make a bunch of money? But like for real, right? Not just like on paper. Like how are we going to actually make a bunch of money? And that's a process that we go through to vet that. And I would expect in the next year or so, you're going to see some companies that have been around for a while coming to market with actual real products that actually really have value, that actually really make money.
Is that a friend to the multi-billion-dollar valuation out there?
So I want to add a different aspect to it. I'm probably more on the optimistic side because I have seen value in AI in corporations, and I actually think that most of the corporations are adopting it, and maybe at different stages, because I've seen it, even within our company, you can see like the different stakeholders having the different level of maturity. And so I think value creation is very important to be able to communicate that value back. And it's a strategic advantage that corporations will take over. Competitions, if competitors are all using it and you are just still experimenting it, you are going to be lagging behind with all the technologies that are actually at a much more mature stage. However, I do believe that there needs to be some guardrails that needs to be discussed among the stakeholders, and also educating the stakeholders about what needs to be what we need to be thinking about. Hallucination is no joke here, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't really submit a legal brief with
Yeah.
a case that's just never really happened. And then I think that lawyer actually was a real case. That lawyer actually got fined by the judge.
I could have lost his
Did he
his
lose
bar
his-
degree. I don't know if he
yeah.
did, but I didn't track.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what you're pointing out is really the tension between the desire and the need to innovate and the compliance issues. One example that comes to mind is a global strategy consulting firm that told its employees, please experiment with AI, do it, right? So that's good. And they said, but you can't use your work data because we don't know what's going to happen, right? And so which is it, right? And that's I think a very good illustration of the dichotomy that corporations are struggling with. And so the idea is to find those safe spaces where you can experiment, and if you break things, it's okay, or at least you know that it's possible, right? But that's part of the reason you're experimenting, just like you're doing with Benjamin's children. They're as they walk and fall, they learn, and you learn, right? And so that's the I think that's the fundamental dichotomy. These issues change depending on indeed the quality of the data, right? So if you have good quality data, you should expect good quality outputs. And so if you take society's data and with all its biases, you should expect to have biases in the outputs as well. And if you find biases, it's sad, but it's
But that's
you
why
should
the
expect
understanding of ethics and rules and the value systems and creating synthetic data to compensate for these biases, right? And stuff like that.
But I think one of the themes of this event is that it's not all generative AI, right? So if you use data from esports, or if you use data from aviation, you're going to have very different sets of data, and you can curate them to get outputs that may not have the same kind of issues that Gen AI might have.
But frankly, I think I see it inside every organization. There's a race to the use case. Everybody's trying to figure out what's the killer use case. Still around Gen AI at least, and so take it for granted that Microsoft's going to do what Microsoft does well. They're going to push updates and copilots on every browser, and your employees, even your IT guys, don't even know about it. Literally that happens. A lot of corporations around the world were faced with literally the browser being updated, now having copilots, and every employee being starting to play with that, when there's a paid version that enterprise could have subscribed to that would actually block all the data from going back out. Right? Talk about how you manage the release of upgrade systems inside your corporation, and compliance exists for this sort of risk, right? So I think the use case is still out there. People are trying to figure out based on the current state of technology. And what we talk a lot about internally is what is the art of the possible? I think a lot of people don't understand that. They don't know what's possible and not possible with AI technology. And as a result, people imagining things. They think this thing's going to be the answer to all of their problems and all their little things and all their little vowels. There's so many use cases that probably are not worth spending time and energy on. Right? So that prioritization is critical. And that's the hard part, to be honest.
How can we help these companies that are either fearful of adopting AI or who may try and don't know how to go about it, and that could lead to a failure? Do you think there should be teams within the firm that understand the business, who do understand the AI aspect, or maybe consultants, for lack of a better word? I'm not sure if that's the right way, but somebody who can help translate the need of the company with what's available out there in the market, somebody who's knowledgeable, because I think there is a big missing link between, and maybe not every single firm, but some firms, and the technology that's available out there.
Well, I'd say our new shareholder is very smart because he decided to go acquire us to accelerate that knowledge and expertise and bring that in-house. You could try to seek it outside. I mean, like any problem solving in my books, like you want to get smarter about the problems. If you have the knowledge in-house, great. If you don't, go get it. And it could take various forms, but then you need to implement it. If you don't implement it, you don't learn anything. Or you don't build trust, right? Like we decided, bring the people in the loop early so they build trust around these systems as well. And so I think what corporations have not done very well is creating sandboxes, creating an environment where people can start experimenting and trying and testing and failing, in these safer environments. They don't really exist today. Some companies are better than others at doing that, but a lot of companies are still in the context of, I don't have a data lake, or I know I have the data. These guys have it. I don't have it. Why don't I have it? I mean, they're still at that stage. Right? That's why the bigger guys, the Googles of the world and others, they were digital native type companies. They have that advantage of they already fought early into making sure that data would be able to be mined and monetized. So to your point, again, seek the knowledge where it is, bring it in-house, retain it and implement it and test it, right? Build, measure, learn, the whole startup way.
I like the sandbox environment. I think that's one aspect to accelerate that innovation. But in the meantime, I think it also be able to just start small. Nothing is too small to start, and listen to the pain points. Instead of driving a technology, drive is the value. I think Chris actually mentioned, and Ben also repeated as well. It's like, what's that value versus like, what technology can I help you to solve, right? So I think that kind of conversations with stakeholders typically warrants more in-depth kind of explorations down the road, and then it seems to be working very well in large corporations.
You say you don't need AI for this.
Yeah. That's actually one of the things that attracted STI to AIR, is that AIR has this kind of horizontal platform of different technologies, including RL, which is a little bit of a black magic required to be successful kind of technology. And so when we looked at different ways to try to validate AI as part of the solution space we were thinking at, it made more sense to partner and construct a win-win construct around a POC than to actually just go hire people and try to do it at high risk, right? And so that having companies like AIR, where they're sort of horizontal in the sense that they have these technologies that they can deploy to different verticals, that was great for STI in this specific case.
Thank you. Another question?
Hey, it's Shalom Ormsby again. I'm looking at all of this from a humanistic perspective. And Benjamin, I was really interested when you were talking about different forms of ROI. And I don't know if it was implied that there's a form of ROI that tilts toward the greater good. And I'm wondering, what levers are available to help bend the arc of this superpower technology toward the good, and also to assure that it doesn't go off the rails into the bad, to the sci-fi dystopias that we've all watched?
I think we were on stage at our first Applied AI conference, 2016, 17, and we said, look, with great power come great responsibilities. And I can't think of a technology that can affect people live and at scale so fast. Right? We consume it every day in browsing pictures and recommendation algorithms, but we know the biases of that too. And I think a lot of the companies so far have been, aimed at creating a source of income and revenue, because that's what ultimately economically drives the economic model today in society, right? For corporations at least. And so that's what they're going to optimize for. So if we can start building, optimization engines toward different goals than just monetization, because it's not always about monetization, right? Especially when you talk about these goals. I think as venture capitalists, look, you want to invest with purpose. Now, some people invest because it's just about the money, and that's fine. But I think we've always tried to think about, if we invest in powerful technology, let's make sure that we do things that will hopefully make the world a better place. It doesn't prevent accidents. A lot of things, you go in one direction with good intent and it goes bad. So building safe mechanism along the way. But I sincerely believe that, again, innovation and technology can help accelerate and solve a lot of problems. It can create others. And so the framework and the humans that are behind it and the mindset behind it is extremely important. In venture capital, you invest in leaders and founders that have a vision. And it's very important for us, especially in the early days, to ask them, what's your vision? Where do you think this company is going to be in 5 or 10 years? What is technology going to become? And hopefully it's something that makes the world better. And that's, we always like to be, everybody looks at Silicon Valley, laughs about this motto, but I believe in it. Because you need to have that vision for it right away. And I said, as a founder, don't blame the future. Don't say the future is horrible. The future is what we're making of it. It's what we're building every day towards. And so if founders don't have a positive vision of the world going forward, we're doomed, right? Because the people are affecting change effectively. And so that's what I try to teach my kids too. I say, look, you can't complain about the way things are. You need to think about what they're going to become. But you can't complain because it's not happening. What are you doing about it, right? So I think that's the mindset of ownership and human consciousness. You talk about global consciousness around. I think there was a global consciousness around AI and Gen AI, which is interesting and should be leveraged for better than for worse. But again, humans are these fickle things.
Any last observations from panelists?
I just want to add something to Ben as well. As a corporations, yes, we look at all the KPIs quantitatively, but innovation sometimes is about empowerment as well. And I've noticed that the things that the projects or AI projects that we actually adopted are the ones that actually empower our safety team, for instance, right, to track work injuries and then any warehouses operations. And so those are the ones that actually drive people to want to do it. That intrinsic motivation that we're looking for, we actually found people who actually gather around wanting this to succeed before seeing an actual KPI. So corporations are about people as well. And so innovation is about how to drive human to reach that potential. So when you're bringing your stories as a founder or as a startup, try to bring that aspect as well, empowerment, because we're also human. We're listening to you, right? And what empowers you and what empowers us, that we can bring the story back to our stakeholders, that's what we actually wanted to fund from an investor as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about attracting talents. Our startups are not competing with the Googles of the world, Facebook, by paying their people more. It's by having a worthwhile mission and vision. And people actually will connect with that, right? Because that's what ultimately motivates us. In a minute, you realize that more money is not going to make you happier. It's what you do with it. It's the people you touch, right? I think that is what connects us as humans, and machines don't care. So if they are a tool to help us achieve that, awesome. I'm for it.
Yeah, I think if I can add to that, but maybe a very technical perspective, which is, when we think about training our agents, particularly in regulated markets, we have to think about sort of respecting the regulations, right? And so it kind of goes to this talk earlier about respecting the rules of Formula One or of racing, right? So how do you get the RL agent to encode knowledge about what actually is good sportsmanship and what is within the rules, even though they're somewhat sort of fuzzy, right? So how do you get that information from like pilot certification, regs, or how do you get it for like physician certification? How do you encode that into the agent's sort of worldview so that they're respecting that and they're optimizing within that domain, ideally? And they're not going to go like, oh, well, actually, if I just cut the leg off, it's going to be a faster solution to this problem, right? Like you want to avoid that kind of situation because yes, it's a very inefficient leg here. Yes.
With that, we're going to close the panel. I invite you to thank our panelists for the engaging conversation.